game changer in conversations, because every time I would hear, okay, we're going to change the way we do our conversations. We're going to have different conversations. We're going to have better conversations. We're going to have difficult conversations. Okay, another technique, another thing we're going to look at. But this was the first one that stuck with me because of its characteristics. Not just because relationship possibilities and actions makes perfect sense, because going into action too fast, too quick, without consideration just doesn't make sense. The mere sequential aspect of it and dynamic aspect of it, for me, was wow, because it respected that messy conversation aspect that we encounter in our conversations.
Welcome to another edition of Coffee Coaching and Conversations. Coaching, what is it? What are we doing?
Coffee Conversations.
Coaching, coffee and conversations. We're going to get it sooner or later.
I know.
All three are critical.
Well, they are. I have my coffee.
I forgot mine.
I'm sure I could use some coaching, and conversations are always good with you two. So it's always good. I know the topic that we wanted to talk about today and go a little deeper on was the conversation model, relationship, possibility, and action. So who wants to, if I bring up the visual, who wants to speak into it?
Could I do a setup piece, Ian?
Of course you could.
Just to give a sense of where it came from, and then we'll just go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bring it up. So I can just touch in on how this came to be in our kit, in our little tool belt. And the reason why this has become, I think, one of our more, well-used tools in various aspects of conversations that we have, even those that aren't coaching conversations.
Are you done?
I'm waiting for the story. This is like
I was going to get you to put up the visual. Oh, okay. Sorry.
See, every time Karen tells a story, for me, it's like a bedtime story. Like it's like those stories that you just can hear over and over and over again.
Oh, I'm glad you said that, because I thought maybe it was going to put you to sleep.
No. I'm like, you could. I immediately went to this format. If you rewind the video, you'll see.
I thought there was. I too thought there was more to the setup here than that. So maybe.
Well, I wanted to have it up so that it could be a visual for people to see.
Did we build it enough? Did we build it up enough for everybody? Because now everybody's like, "What is this? Come on, Karen!"
I'm on the edge of my seat. So this conversation model it's called the 3 types of conversation. I learned it from Paul Lefebvre, who was a mentor and a professional coach in the public service that introduced a starter kit for managers, for leaders in the public service. And he encouraged, all of you were part of this, volunteers to commit to learning these tools and to teach them to other managers, teach them to other teams inside the public service. And so when I started delivering the tools, one of the questions that kept coming up over and over again was, can you give us a coaching framework? Because it wasn't called a coaching framework. It was called 3 types of conversations. And this was designed for everyday conversations. And so in my professional development, as you know, I took coaching training and certification, and the models that I had just were really, I want to say, cumbersome for us to use in everyday conversations. I use this one way more than any of my other kind of tools that I have in my toolkit in the formal side of my coaching development. So what I did is I said, this one here is a perfect starter kit for a coaching conversation. And it follows a lot of the frameworks that we had that were more complex. So I shifted the workshop, and I said, here's the framework that you're going to use when you're practicing having coaching conversations today. So I wanted to set that up, and it became very well received. And I think for you two, I actually would like you guys to speak into this, because you were part of the recipients of that workshop and becoming an informal trainer in the coaching capacity building in the public service. So I'm curious to know what your reactions were when you saw that as a model for how we move through conversations and how we can use that when we're practicing and building our skills. We want to use coaching as one of the dance shoes for the conversation that we're in.
Game changer. Game changer in conversations. Because every time I would hear, okay, we're going to change the way we do our conversations. We're going to have different conversations. We're going to have better conversations. We're going to have difficult conversations. Okay, another technique, another thing we're going to look at. But this was the first one that stuck with me. So as far as a personal experience, because of its characteristics, not just because relationship possibilities and actions makes perfect sense, because going into action too fast, too quick, without consideration just doesn't make sense. The mere sequential aspect of it and dynamic aspect of it for me was wow, because it respected that messy conversation aspect that we encounter in our conversations. It respected the fact that there's resistance. It respected the fact that there needs to be some type of human element in the exchange when we talk about relationship. It respected that whole listening aspect, because you can't have a relationship around the topic if you're not listening. But very often I would show up in my conversation in a more, I need to react rather than respond, which we talked about before, which was, okay, what do I say next? How can I say something that's going to sound smart? And I'm not listening anymore. But having this model in the back of my mind, now instinctively and probably more organically now, makes me say, okay, we need to bathe in the relationship a bit more, because I don't think I understand exactly what Karen's feeling right now. So we need to talk about it more. So it forces me to do it, and it's just so rewarding. So that's my journey in a nutshell, but it's just a game changer from that perspective.
You asked, Karen, you asked how did I like receive it initially, right? And I don't know if I really got it via the workshop. It wasn't until I started to experience it. So you'll often hear me say words don't teach, experiences do. And for me, that's the case too. So those three words didn't mean a ton to me in the moment. But the experience of knowing what each of those really is and being able to know where I am in any conversation based on my conversation. And I have a pretty habitual nature of wanting to get to action too. So having conversations with my wife was always a really good indicator of me trying to force something that's not quite ready. And this framework gave me an opportunity to be able to bounce around between that. So realizing I'm trying to fix her problem that she doesn't need to fix, and then being able to ask her, what does she really need? Go back to relationship and have her decide where this conversation really goes based on what she needed, as opposed to what I thought she needed as a grown-ass woman. So it just gave me a place to play and to know where I'm at in any given situation. And I've used this with so many clients, prospective clients, as well as just a simple framework for them, so that when they go home and they realize they're trying to make something happen, that they're likely trying to make something happen, but it's short-circuiting them in being able to really get the results that they're looking for, because they're not having the conversations at the depth they need to have them to get that momentum forward and get a different result.
I remember I did the workshop once, and many times, but this one time I was in Toronto and there was a woman sitting in front of me and I introduced the model, and she just, the hand went up so fast. I said, any reactions? Well, she had one, and she said, I have 5 kids. I work full time, because I had invited people to consider that they the idea of slowing down to speed up, to engage in these 3 conversations, so that when you get to action, it mobilizes things quicker. And so she was really ticked at me. I work for D&D. And she had this big story about this was not a doable framework. And that was because I introduced it right at the beginning. So I said, you know what? I'd like you to, would you do me a favor? Would you sit with that for me? And at the end of the workshop, I want your feedback. And of course, as you know, we added in the 6-pack asking questions so people could find their own solutions. Just this idea of staying in relationship long enough so that you know what people need versus feeling you have to be responsible. You say the word react, Mark. I think we feel responsible sometimes to give people. We are helpers, so we feel responsible to do, give. I intend to take care of. And at the end of the day, she came over to me. She said, "Oh my goodness, this is going to be so helpful for me at home. I've got older children now. I don't need to tell them so she could see the possibility of where this model could fit in her life. Because like we say with everything, sometimes action is exactly where you need to be. It's a total right place for the moment. But this allowed her to see the potential of where relationship would fit and where possibilities would shift and where action was still hers. So I was really, you said words don't teach, experiences do. And I do agree with you, Ian. She needed to go through the experience of practicing this. And she found a place. And by the way, it wasn't at work. Did you notice that? It was started at home. This is going to, and she said, this is going to be so good for my well-being. And she said, and it's going to be really good for my relationship with my kids. So she could see where already just having that framework, like doing nothing else but listening. And you said something really important, Mark. We call it a conversation model, but it really is a tuning and listening model as well. If we're not listening and don't know where we are and where they are, we don't know how to navigate. And this allows us to travel through the messiness and check in and see where they are, and also to notice where we are and meet them where they are and see what they need to move through. So I felt that was what you just said, Ian, was really important about you need to experience it and find where does this resonate and fit in my world, or does it fit at all?
Yeah. And I think one of the words that people get tripped up over in this model is the relationship one. They think that's the touchy-feely part of a conversation, and that doesn't have a place in the workplace or whatever. I'd be curious for either of you to talk into what does relationship conversation really mean?
So relationship, and it's as soon as we utter the word relationship or bring it up on the screen or talk about it, people's mind automatically goes, and so did mine too, the relationships that we have. And that's a higher level and a bigger level and a more complex long-term level. And that's important, critically important. But we need to remember that relationships are built with these tiny little building blocks. And all you have to do is cross culture in conversations to see how that differs and how relationships happen at a different pace and a different depth and have a different importance. What we talk about when we talk about this model helps us with that, because when we talk about relationship here, we are talking about the relationship at the time between 2 or more people on a topic very often. And that fuels our curiosity, because regardless of Ian, you and I could be right now in a very precarious relationship. Maybe we don't get along. Maybe we have personality conflicts. Maybe we have downright conflicts. But all of a sudden, we're in a conversation on a topic, and we can actually achieve a relationship status on that topic by listening and having a conversation and being curious authentically and asking these open-ended questions around that topic. And that's where the small building block can actually sometimes even fix the bigger relationship picture, because this is what we're now rallying around, is this one little thing in this conversation. And because that exchange around the whole relationship, we're getting curious. What's important for you? How is this affecting you? That deeper understanding, that listening, and also that resistance, because we have an allergic holy crap mode effect to that resistance, and we see it as bad. Whereas now I see it as an opportunity because of this model, because it's not bad. It's an opportunity. It means there's something that's not uncovered yet. There's a question missing. There's a request missing. So let's take a step back. Let's take a deep breath, Karen, and let's talk about this. So I love that resistance part. So for me, relationship means it's going to get messy, but how do we deepen this conversation around this minute topic? And it helps the bigger relationship picture.
Mark, I think you said 3 really key things in there I just want to highlight. So in that relationship conversation, there's what's important, what's that person's why in there, like what's their motivation, and what's their hidden request. And often we don't get deep enough into that conversation to find out what those are, and we just start pounding away on what the next steps are going to be, and then let's go again. And I think those are some of those keys that need to be mined out, so that you're having an exploratory conversation around possibilities that make sense for where this person is, so that then the next actions will then flow,
exactly,
pretty easy from there.
You said it eloquently. The way sometimes we say it is going to possibilities without exploring relationship lacks innovate, it lacks commitment. So there's no common commitment. So how can you move to this? That's where the yeah, but comes in, and the resistance comes in when you try to move too fast to the next one. So you said it eloquently.
I used to use an example. And I still do, and I notice it everywhere, not just in workplace, but I'll ask who's been a new public servant in the last year or two, and they'll put their hands up. And I said, so did you, when you had a board interview, they're asking you all kinds of questions, they've got your resume, then you get into the workplace. How many of you got asked by your peers or your manager, like, tell me a bit about what you've done in the past? What are some skills that you bring to the table? What are some things you'd like to learn? I said, and I said, now don't give me any response. But what I noticed is we give them an orientation manual, and we get the computer done up, and we get them into action, and we start to, get them to do their job, which is super important. But we lose our curiosity about who are you and what do you bring to the table? And what do you want to learn? And it isn't just a performance annual thing that you do early on, and you can tap into. We've got so many talented people that come into the public service or into a workplace or into a curling club that are volunteering. And that's what I'm learning, because I'm now in a volunteer world. And, I'm asking them, like, what did you do for a living? How do you want to, hey, do you think you'd be interested in, maybe helping us out with something here, until you know who the people are. And I think that is so honoring. Like, the best thing you can do in a role on a team or as a manager is, like, let people know you think they're really interesting and they have something to bring to the table. I don't think there's lack of will or wanting to do something and contribute. No one's being asked. And when you start to spotlight that kind of stuff, you just see people their flower starts to open up. So people see it as touchy-feely. Oh my God, am I going to have to deal with, like, the situation at home or whatever? That might come up through conversations as you start to build relationships, but you actually don't have to do anything with that. Sometimes we just need an ear to listen to that. So I think it's a skill set that in the last few years, because we've been so action-oriented, so driven, and our plates are so full, and the electronic world has been a delight to have. We've got so much instantaneousness stuff that comes to us through emails, through texting, through Zoom now, but the the downside of what it's closing down is we're not spending any time in a relationship. And I think we've become uncomfortable because we've lost that way to do it naturally, if you know what I mean. I believe I know it's a natural instinct in human beings. We're wired to connect, and we all have a different level of what that means to us. So if you don't know what that looks like for yourself and you haven't been practicing it, I think it can feel really, really awkward and worrisome. And right now, what we're hearing from people that I'm working with in organizations, like we're talking about mental health. We're talking about the impact of the pandemic, and people are struggling. So those conversations are more and more needed, and we have to be skilled up to know how to support that person and let them have this conversation, but also to make sure that they find their own way, which is why I love coaching, is that you can help them uncover what that looks like, what are some options and strategies they're seeing, and then they can also discern what are their actions that's going to really serve them to support them through whatever that's happening to them right now. We don't have to be responsible. How do we help them be responsible so that they can feel they can get back some of that feeling of, you use the word often, Marc, control around a situation in their life. So I really think this is a time where reconnecting to that and skilling ourselves up in the ability to have relationship conversations, it fuels possibilities, it fuels actions, and it supports people to take their own way, make their own way forward.
I have an example. I'm not sure it applies, but I'm going for it.
Okay, Marc.
No, but I'm bringing it to an everyday conversation. So I go downstairs after a day's work and I say, okay, for supper, we're having seafood, Alfredo sauce with, nice cheese on it and the whole, nice supper. I said, I don't want that. I said, how come? It's nice. It's, it's great. It's good. It's, we both love seafood. And then, okay, you don't want that. Okay, what are we having? So see, I went from action. This is what we're having for supper. Then it went to possibilities because I have to go back because I went to action too fast. And possibilities. Okay, what are we having? But then we're going back and forth. And it's only when I said, okay, well, what are we gonna have? Like, what are we gonna do? And I asked a couple of questions, which I forget what they were, but they led to her telling me that it's not about the supper. It's because, we've been apart all day. You've been working, I've been working. And she said, how can we find something where we're sitting together while we're making it? So we ended up with a barbecue because we could sit outside. And it was about what you said, Karen, about that relationship of being together. But I went to action. Let's get this nice supper. It was a nice supper, but it didn't satisfy the need at the time, which was only uncovered after we had that relationship conversation. And when we slowed it down, and it might sound like, okay, not that good of an example, but it is in another way because it breaks it down to a very simple conversation about a very simple thing, yet one that we get hung up on quite a bit. And you could use the same example for where do we go on vacation or how do we handle this upcoming project at work? We move into action sometimes so fast that it doesn't take into consideration that innovation aspect and that commitment aspect and what's important to us that we haven't said yet. So that's just an example that came to mind as you were speaking about relationships.
Marc, that's a perfect example because oftentimes the action that we're taking is unrelated to the what's important or what's underlying. And if we don't have that conversation, then we continue to kind of spin with our partnerships, with our relationships, no matter where we are. So it's in that slowing down that provides that possibility to have that conversation and find out what's really going on, and not ignore it. But if you weren't aware enough where you are in these three conversations, you're not going to make that adjustment. You're just going to plow through and make your Alfredo sauce, and your wife's going to be pissed. So
what do you mean you don't want seafood? So,
it's a great idea. Sure, it's a great idea, but it's not what I need right now. Yeah, so it just gives you, that's why I like it's 3 words. It's not complicated, but it's, if you know where you sit, you're able to make the adjustment. if you are unaware, like Karen says all the time, you can't change what you can't see. If you're not aware of where you are, you can't even make the leap inside of it. So this just provides a nice little quick visual that provides you a little bit of flow so that you can bounce around in the messiness of a conversation.
I still forget it quite a bit. I forget it all the time in the conversations until resistance shows up. Yeah, but shows up. Oh, okay, wait, I recognize that. That's resistance. Okay, RPA, let's go. Where are we? Okay, we're all right. Let's go back here. Let's
There's
start up again.
more
And you know
versions
what?
of yeah, but there's yeah, fine,
Yeah,
sure,
whatever.
stone cold silence. There's a lot of there's a lot of different ways that resistance shows up in our conversations, or total inaction. I just don't want to do it. Nope. So, like I said, it's a quick framework that provides a little bit of a flow to let you know where you're sitting. It's a mini roadmap.
I was just going to say that, because what I learned in my other work around facilitation, and I know, Marc, you have talked to me many times about this in the work you do with great big groups and complex situations, that's how I design, the three of us now design roadmaps and how we engage with in training. It's part of, like, we need a relationship, possibility, and action, because they come together, and people will say the feedback we get is, I really like the flow. It felt like everything was put together well, and we got everything we needed, because when we're designing, when we're listening, and when we're saying, well, what's the space? So even when we're doing our roadmap for just engaging in learning or facilitating a large group, we engage all three conversations. And because I feel it's normal, I think it sounds like a real weird, this is normal. I think that this is part of our DNA. It's bigger than just it feels natural to people, is what I would say. And when we do that, it feels complete. And it doesn't mean it still could look very messy, because conversations are messy, even when you're using a framework like this. It's not meant to keep it all tidy. We love it to look like that, but we know it's like totally, if we drew it on top of it, it's like a web of back and forth and resistance and cross arrows. But I love what you just said, Marc, earlier, is that when you have this in your line of sight, when you start to listen this way and practice it even quietly, as you're listening to conversations, where's that person right now? Oh, I noticed that person's over there. You can actually observe and see this in action without them even knowing they're doing it. But what it does is, when you notice it's messy and you're getting resistance, or things seem to be stuck, you can stop and say, where am I? Where are they? You start to reset your button, and there you go. You're back in the messiness of the conversation, but you're meeting them where they are. And that's why the simplicity of this tool is such a great place for you, just to have it behind you, and just to notice when you're getting those cues that things aren't moving in a direction, there's someone stuck, or as Ian said, they're just not wanting to do anything. Maybe that they need to stop right now and stay in relationship, because they haven't really made, you said a word very earlier, in relationship is where commitment shows up. Isn't that interesting? So when we're down in action thinking we're getting people to go, and we've not stepped there, it doesn't come down in action. So it's a clue. Okay, if there's no movement, they're not ready. And you always use the word yet. So let's go back up there and find out what's getting in their way, what's slowing them down, what's holding them back. And there could be very good reasons that they haven't yet shared.
Okay, tough question time. Everything has its limitations. When does this not work?
In I'm going to challenge you back, Marc. Give me the parameters of what not working means.
Where you think, hey, I'm using RPA model that they talked about. It's not working. I'm meeting resistance. We're not getting anywhere. I feel uncomfortable. This is really a difficult conversation, and it's not helping. We've all had those.
What's popping into mind, Mark, is that just because it may be not be moving as fast as you want it to do, doesn't mean that you're not in it already. Doesn't mean that it's not working. You just may need to spend a hell of a lot more time in relationship to get there. Or maybe you got to hang out in action a little bit more with that person so that they continue to, let's say, bang their head up against the wall, so that they can realize that they're banging their head up against the wall. And if they want something to change, they may have to figure out maybe what's behind this, what's getting in our way, what's whatever. So I don't think there's ever it's not working. It's where am I willing to spend my time, and what do I want to try differently, so that I can feel the flow of this.
I love your answer, because we talked about this. We referred to this as a roadmap. But what happens when you're presented with a recipe or roadmap? You just want to plow through. You just want to get to that action. So that's what you described is absolutely it. When does it not work? When we're trying to go too fast. When we see the A on the bottom, well, we got to get there. We got to get to the action. No, we don't. So the beauty of the RPA model is what happens, you have a whole conversation and you don't get to the P or the A. It's a perfect conversation because you spent a heck of a lot of time in the relationship.
Karen, you say this a lot, and if you could just maybe revolve around this a little bit, it'd be great, or expand on it, is that action can happen in relationship.
Yeah, there's an action in every part of a conversation, right? So what came to me is, and then I'll ping off of that, Ian, is what you asked the question, it's not working. My question is, maybe we have to step back and redefine what success would look like. Because that's one of the questions we asked at the very beginning. And so if it's not moving, then where are we at? And what's success look like for us right now? And that's where then defining, because there's action happening in every element. And so if you're walking away with, a good understanding, knowing what's important, knowing what for them what success would like, or for us what success would look like, but we didn't get down into any what people want, which is give me the goods. Like let's get going. And that's what happens. We've got 15 minutes left. We need those action items. And I get that. Because so that's what I would say. There's action happening. And can you allow that to have some space to be processed? Because that would be my second thing is of the slowing down to speed up. So maybe that's where you create a pause and you leave people with a couple of questions to think about and say, now coming in tomorrow, because they need processing times. That's where I went with you, Mark, is I get it. I've actually been there. I've been that person that's pushed an agenda. Didn't go so well. That was my biggest, I got feedback because we used the feedback model and we did it in the room. 50 people giving me feedback. And it wasn't all on my shoulders, but I was the person at the front of the room. And I took all the notes and I wrote a very large lesson learned out of that one, because I pushed the agenda because the client pushed me to action. That was a big learning for me. I needed to go through that. I needed to feel I had to do that because the client had brought me in and the client was paying me. And that was my big learning is no, I won't do that to me again or to the room again. And I did talk, we had a cool down time and I did reconnect because this was a long time person that I worked for who brought me in, and we deconstructed. And there's Ian's note. Ian's great word.
It's my business name, but keep going.
I know. I love it. We deconstructed what happened and what happened between us, and I ended up being lucky enough to hang out with the management team a few months later, and I bought them a drink. We were at a Legion. I said sorry for that terrible experience. But they all said the same thing. Everybody said it wasn't so it was such a good learning for people. So, but you have to be aware. You have to know when you leave in your gut, pushing people to action. Oh, And I still do it. Like you said, Mark, I'm still pushy.
But you can't change what you can't see either.
No,
So
no.
you get to learn from yourself by maybe learning, okay, why do I need to push this person to do something? What is it that's going on inside of myself right now? So some of this is being able to reflect in and see, how can I use relationship possibility and action for myself in this conversation? It's not just about the other person, it's how am I being in this as well. So there's a lot to learn. This can be used in many different applications. What's going on between you and I, what's going on within myself, where are they, all giving you information as to where you're at and what needs to happen next.
Hopefully we'll talk about pause in one of our podcasts. I think that's another muscle development of, being present and slowing down and creating that break and pause so that you can process.
Power of the pause is going to be the title of that one.
Yeah.
Well, I've started a list of ideas as well, so I'm sure we'll get there. Any final thoughts on the conversation model?
It helps me to slow down, and it helps me to listen at a deeper level. It gives me that roadmap, and it teaches me that resistance is not a bad thing. There's a saying that says nothing has a meaning until somebody gives it a meaning. So in the conversation, Ian, if you say something, I'm going to give it a meaning. Doesn't mean that that's what you meant. So without that initial relationship, I can't confirm that. So any actions we take might be the wrong ones. So let's spend time making sure that we have the same meaning, that we have a relationship around that. Mm-hmm. So I'm reminded of that saying, nothing has a meaning until somebody gives it a meaning.
Karen.
Well, you got to slow down in order to speed up, which is what this conversation model has done for me, because I live in possibilities. That's where I like to hang out. And the last thing I would say, people change by the way you listen to them. And even though we call this a conversation model, it has really helped me listen in a very different way. And I know it has really served me well in all aspects of my life.
And what I would say is conversations are messy. And just knowing that conversations are messy, it gives me more permission to be okay with it being messy. So knowing you don't have to get it right, it's just an indication of where you're at. Just like any roadmap, if you make a detour or you're forced to make a detour, you have to recalibrate where you need to go next. And that's, as long as you don't give it a meaning, like Mark says, well, then you just move on from there. Actually, I missed a turn the other day on my way somewhere. I took an early exit and I had to go and do a loop-de-loop. I could have, in the moment, with action, cut 2 lanes to make sure I got back on track, or I could just take my lumps, reassess, pull into the McDonald's parking lot, and then turn around. It's not that big a deal. Slow down so you can make a better decision. So I think we'll leave it at that. So if you have questions, write them in the comments below, and we'll see you on our next coaching, coffee, and conversation.
Good job.